Hi, everyone. Actually, I'm going to do a curveball and talk about something different today. We're going to talk about test and learns. So as Faye introduced me, I'm an in-house director for a global marketplace. I'm also a consultant, mainly around the topics of neuromarketing and CRO. And I also do a lot of things with my time, like figure skating, aerialist, and then I do fire breathing. So if you want to talk about that later, do that too. I also do a lot of test and learns though, as part of my job. So I tend to get some questions whenever I onboard one of my team to do test and learns. And some of these questions are around how do you select test and control groups? How do you choose what metrics you want to focus on? How do you select the time frame and the test designs that you want to use? And finally, how should you analyze and report on the data? So I put together this guide to help you get started if you haven't started doing test and learns, or maybe give you a bit of additional insight today. So let's dive right into it. So the first thing when you do a test and learn is that you want to formulate an hypothesis. And the hypothesis might come and should come from the questions that you're asking yourself. So your challenge maybe on your website might be you're not getting enough traffic to a certain portion of the website. So there's other metrics that you can focus on, but in general, the hypothesis should look something like this. So updating my titles, for example, to include a recency signal, will significantly improve my CTRs. So your test will look something like this. You might add a recency signal, summer 2023, to add freshness to your titles. And that's the representation of your hypothesis on your test. So in the hypothesis that we've just seen, there's two main factors that you want to really focus on. Your independent variable, which is the one that you select, the one that shouldn't change as a result of your treatment, which is your titles, your recency signal, especially on your titles. And then the dependent variable, which is the variable that is going to change as part of your treatment, as a consequence of your treatment. So there's other examples that you can take and you can basically use to direct your testing strategy. It all depends on what you want to focus on your website, what the challenges are. And some of these can be, for example, how do you use content to improve traffic? You might want to test UGC content versus default content. Or how do you leverage internal linking, for example, to improve rankings? And that might include, for example, adding a linking module to the category page. What on-page elements are the ones that mostly contribute to an increment in CTRs? And what kind of schema markup is the one that works best for your brand? So there's all of these different things that you can ask yourself and formulate your hypothesis on. And there's also resources that you can use. So there's the SEO Clarity Split Testing Ideas, for example. It's a sheet that introduces a number of different ideas. I think it's up to 3,000. The Search Pilot newsletter is great. Comes every week, and it's a very good introduction to test and learns. An SEO case study database by Adam Gant, which is a paid option, but it's really worth it. So once you formulate your hypothesis, you have a lot of elements already that make you ready for your test. So you also have to select the test design at this point, which depends on what are the variables that you have chosen to test. Is it something that's upper funnel? Is it an SEO metric that we can get out of Google Search Console, for example? Or is it something lower down the funnel that might be making more difficult to isolate at the end? What kind of changes are you also trying to make? Are you updating a part of the page? Are you updating some other things on your website that might be tracked differently? And what tools do you have available to implement the changes? Are you using a CMS and are you manually implementing the changes? Is it an HTML change? Or are you relying on tools that can help you not only implement the change, but also skew the traffic to the different groups? So there's a number of things that you have to take into account to choose the test design. But in general, these will lead you to three main test designs, which are A/B testing, multivariate testing, and pre-post testing. I normally use a lot the last one, and we're going to see why, but I'm also going to cover the other two very briefly. So the main concept of A/B testing is that you test a variable, which is the only thing that really should be tested, in the same time frame, so that all of the other factors are controlled for. So for example, you have one page, and one version of the page has the default content in the normal placement. So say, for example, that it's at the bottom of the header image. And the alternative variant is that you have the content in a different placement. So you switch it up, and you put a header image at the bottom of the content. So, as I mentioned, both variants A and B should be tested in the same time frame because you want to be able to have the cleanest data you can. And there's another version of this, which is of the split testing, which is the multivariate testing. So instead of having 2 variants, you have multiple. And that can be 3, that can be 4, etc. So for example, in this case, you can have your default page with the content in the normal placement and the content that you always have. You can also decide to test a different kind of content, for example, the FAQ content, which was much more relevant before Google decided that it wasn't relevant anymore. And then you can switch it up the place as well in the third variant, so you can decide to have, not only a different kind of content, but also a different positioning. And the main difference is that these two sort of test designs require different levels of traffic to be able to be tested. So A/B testing can be done with low or medium traffic as well, but a multivariate testing needs to be done with a sizable amount of traffic, because otherwise you cannot really draw conclusions. So these kind of test designs are better suited in general for CRM, UX and CRO testing, marketing landing pages, paid campaigns, and some kind of SEO tests. The reason why I say some kind is that normally these changes will rely on tools, or will rely on changes made at the edge, so that you have all the factors controlled for. But in general, they also rely on technical directions that you have to follow. The first one being, you shouldn't be serving 2 different kinds of content to the search engine and the user. 302 redirects should be used in place of 301 redirects, and also JavaScript-based redirects are also fine. That's, for example, when you're redirecting the user from one version of the page to the other. And use canonicals to refer back to the page. So if you have alternate versions, use canonicals on those pages to refer back to the page that's your normal version. The one that, as I mentioned, I use the most, though, is the pre- and post-test design, which requires you to test the same variable across a number of days or weeks. And this, for example, means that in July, I decide I want to change the default content that I have on the page to FAQ content, and I want to measure the impact that it's having on my performance. Control and variance in these test designs are tested in 2 subsequent periods as opposed to A/B and multivariate testings. These are better suited for single on-page changes. So when you have, for example, as we've seen before, a title change that goes up on just one single, or either one single page or a test page, a test group. Groups that cannot be matched. So that means, for example, when you don't really have a variant that you can use because maybe the sample's too small, the traffic's too low, there's not really a good match for that test. So you just use time as your factor. Off-page campaigns. So if you have a PR campaign that goes up and you want to measure the impact on a number of your SEO metrics, then you can use the launch date and measure the impact that it's gotten from the launch date. And once you've done so, it's time to select test and control groups as well, which is a question that I get a lot. So how do you select them? I mean, at the end of the day, you should have the kind of test group that you want from your hypothesis already. If your challenge has been not to getting enough traffic, for example, to your category page, you know that you have to select a group in that sample. Make sure, though, that it's pages with enough traffic, because that will help you draw conclusions. Try not to choose your outliers, so not really like your mostly viewed page, or not the one that doesn't have any traffic at all. And finally, try to keep everything tight. So everything and much is close together. So for example, if you're testing category pages, try to keep everything that is a category page and not put together, for example, blog and product pages in the same group. This is all to help reach statistical significance, which while it's not, in marketing, it's not always required. It's great when you want to make informed decisions, especially because I really don't like make decisions when it comes to scaling up or scaling down. So whenever I have something significant, I know that I'm more confident making recommendations. Control groups, on the other hand, how do you select them? You try to keep them as close as possible to your test groups. So there's a few options that I normally use, and sometimes I use them in conjunction together. So especially when you're working off a small website or you have a small test, you can randomize your control group in the same sample as your test group. So for example, you take your Google Search Console data for traffic, let's say, for the past 6 or 12 months, and that depends on how much your website or your industry is affected by seasonality, for example. And in that group, you just literally select or randomize one test group, one control, etc. Don't do it manually like I did here. Use ChatGPT or something. But at the end of the day, you will end up with 2 groups that have roughly the same amount of traffic. Then you can also use, especially for international tests, the same group of pages, exactly the same if they're live, but on a different market that didn't get the treatment, so a market that didn't get the same change. This is great if you have an international website and if you're planning to scale up to other markets. And finally, overall website trend across the same dates. This is something that I use when I have big tests and big websites. This is really helpful when, for example, you have the performance after the change that goes in one direction, and the performance of the general website that goes in the other direction, because it helps validate the impact of the change. However, if your test group makes up for a lot of traffic on your website, don't use that, because then obviously you cannot really make statistical conclusions there. Finally, we're getting to the time frame. I say finally, but I got 2 or 3 more things, so we'll get there. Time frame, it depends. Obviously, it depends on what kind of test you're running. But in general, what I recommend is to do it for 2 or 4 weeks, if it's an SEO test, with intermediate check-ins. The check-ins allow you to catch anything that's gone horribly wrong and revert the change in case. But the final check-in is the one that gives you the understanding of how much of an impact did my test have. So one question that I get from my team sometimes is yeah, but should I get the launch date into the post period? Because at the end of the day, I made my change and I made my launch, but do I need to consider that as part of my post performance? And for SEO tests, I tend to leave it as a standalone date, because I tend to take as the first post-period day the one where the search engine or the users can actually appreciate the change first. So make sure that you can see that you can use a crawler, for example, when the change was appreciated by the search engine and users, because it's going to be more representative for your performance. And analysis. So again, this depends, because you can have a different test design. You can have different tools as well that you can use. If you're like me and you have to rely a lot on yourself, then you can just use the delta formulas. These are really easy. They rely on just getting the performance, the sum of performance, for example, clicks, or the post period, compare it up to the pre-period and divide it. And I got a template at the end, which you can just copy and paste, and it's going to be super easy. And you can format it the way you like, so it's visually pleasing. But one of the things that I always recommend is to use causal impact, because it's really easy once you get into it. I gave a talk last MeasureFest literally about that, and there's a demo that you can check online. And it gives you graphs that look like that. And this is one of my best dreams ever, because as an SEO, you always want to see everything trending up. And it gives you not only a nice graph, but also if the test has been, or the impact of your change has been statistical significant or not, and as well a summary of your test. So it's great. However, if you have money and budget, please use it on these tools or many more that can help make your test better, because then you can use your actual brain to do more with your strategy. Also, it makes things a bit more controlled because you don't have so many factors to control yourself. Finally, we're getting to the reporting. We don't react to numbers, we react to stories, especially your stakeholders. So make sure that you don't provide decontextualized numbers. Provide a top-level summary. And what I tend to suggest is try to think in the summary as if your future self or somebody else external even to your team should go back in, I don't know, a month, a year, and replicate the same test. They should be finding the exact information to be able to do so. So you need to provide the hypothesis, what the hypothesis was, what the groups and treatments were, what the launch and check-in dates were as well, and the results and classification. When I talk about classification, I mainly mention, for example, winner. Was it a winner as compared to your hypothesis? If my hypothesis was that the traffic was going to increase by 10%, did we make it? No, then it's a loser. Was it flat instead? Then it's inconclusive. So that kind of thing that helps you classify your tests when you have a lot of them to keep track of. And the most important thing is the next steps. This is something that your stakeholders want to see, because they won't care about anything else other than the graphs maybe, but at the end of the day, they want to know, okay, we've done this test, what do we do next then? What's the implication of this test? Is it a winner? Then can we scale it up? So make sure that you strategize and recommend what to do next. Also, try to use data visualization. It can be really easy as like just putting a trend line or a vertical line to indicate the launch, because then it makes it easy to map when the change was. Build live dashboard. This is going to save you when your stakeholder comes on a random Tuesday when it's not check-in date yet and is like, okay, so how's your test trending? You can have, you know, your answer right there, and you can build them out of Looker Studio. There's templates online. Make a note of everything that impacted your test in the same time frame as well. This is something that I always do. I have a working sheet, not only for myself, but also for the rest of my team and with the engineering team, where you can track industry events, like algorithm updates that go up at the same time, or engineering releases that go up at the same time as your test, because sometimes, you know, we don't have visibility over everything. Or holidays and cultural events, because we're not working off a lab. We're working in a digital landscape where everything can change. You know, there's so many factors that we need to keep into account. So having this tracking can make things a bit easier. And especially the last one, we had a test running in Spain one time, and it was a migration test, and it was a loser, it was a negative. And the way that the team explained it was, yes, but it was the 4th of July. But actually, it's not 4th of July in Spain. So make sure that you track those, you know, kind of seasonal events across a number of markets, especially if you're working in international, because they're going to help you understand your performance better. So we've gotten to the end almost. We've seen how to do, to formulate an hypothesis, how to select a test design, how to select test and control groups, how to do an analysis, and how to do reporting. But what do we do about the learnings now? Create your repository. This is going to be invaluable because it's not only a statement of your work, but it also helps you, when you put them together, strategize better, because the more learnings you get, the more you can make more efforts to get to know your customers, and the more information they'll give to you, the more you can provide a better experience for them. So yeah, I put together a template. I spent a lot of time making it pretty, so please go and have a look. But yeah, these are my social. Thank you very much.